One and only Mr. Bruce Broughton. Hey Bruce, how you doing, man?
Pretty good. How are you?
Oh, really, really good. And thank you so much for showing up today, man. It's just...
I'm happy. You made it sound like it was a big deal for me to say yes. I'm actually happy to do it because I know we work together a lot, and I like tuba players mostly. And actually, I'm basically a pianist, but when I was a kid, I was a mediocre horn player. So brass is familiar to me, and I like it. So there's no reason not to do this. It sounds like fun.
Well, it's just absolutely awesome to have you here. Where do you want to start, Doug? I mean, should we start with Tommy, or should we?
Cool. Well, okay, believe it or not, there are people who don't fully know the stature of our guest. Now, if by the time when I met Mr. Broughton, he was already a superstar, and that was actually 40 years ago. Um, if you care to go in depth, there are several videos existing on the internet, but you will see that Bruce Broughton was already a very well established television and film composer, and has been doing
Absolutely.
that for
Absolutely.
decades, award after award. He's written many, many concert
Absolutely.
pieces. He is an incredible educator as well. He's an extremely accomplished and decorated musician and composer. He has, I will tell you, the highest esteem from all of my colleagues. Uh,
Yes.
when we get to work for Bruce Broughton or plays music, it is a special day. So now, for all of the, after all, this is the Conical Supremacy, Life in the Low End. Our audience is basically tuba geeks. We're all dying
It
to
was
know
premiere.
more about the famous tuba concerto or sonata. I know I certainly am. Um, and the first time I heard that piece was in the summer of 1978 on the stage of the Bing Theater at
Yeah,
USC.
I was trying to think the other day
It was the wind
when I met
ensemble.
Tommy Johnson.
Um,
I'm guessing
yeah,
it was just because we
yeah.
worked together.
And I was a
needed tuba,
teenager,
so
and
Tommy
I had come
was
down
the
from my
guy.
hometown to the tuba conference that Jim Self
Knowing Tommy, he was a very
And
friendly guy. He
can
was
you
really hard
can
not
you
to
tell
like.
us
He was a
the
great guy.
context of
And
that time? I think
so
the piece was written in 1976.
I remember being over at his house one time, and eventually I started
Yeah.
accompanying him. He would want to go out and play, and he asked me once or twice if I'd play the piano for him. I said, yeah, sure. And then I moved, and it turned out that I moved to about 3 blocks from where he lived. I recognized some of the area. I said, oh, this is Tommy Johnson lives near here somewhere. So we were really very, very close in terms of actual property lines and in terms of friendships. My family got to know his family really well. One of his daughters was our babysitter and all that kind of stuff. Jenny was our babysitter. And I I would play for his students as well. He'd need a piano player, so I'd go over on a Saturday morning and play for his students. Norm Pearson, who was just at the here at Philharmonic, I remember when he was like 16 or 17, playing piano for Norm and a lot of other guys. So yeah, did it? Okay, that's right, I don't remember. But it was, it was a lot of fun. And occasionally he would go off and he'd do a recital and I would play for him. Well, the one thing that I found out about playing for tuba pieces is that the tuba parts were generally a lot more fun than the piano parts. I mean, he did that version of Carnival of Venice, which of
You
course
played for
was,
me when I
really a horrible piano part, but there were other ones that were just really awkward and all that stuff. So I thought that I would like to, we went off and we did a recital one time at Cal Arts in Valencia. And it was a really kind of relaxed thing. And I thought, I'd like to write a piece like that just for Tommy and me, one that has a good piano part and one that has a good tuba part, one that he'll enjoy, one that I'll enjoy, and one that an audience would enjoy, because it was really like that little concert, that little recital we did. So I wrote this piece. And I remember I came over to the house and I said, hey, I've got this piece I wrote for us. So he just read it through, he took the first movement about 30 beats faster than it was supposed to be. And so I remember we premiered it in a recital one night at CSUN. And typical Tommy, right before we got on, he's rubbing his jaw and he said, I did a big double session today. It was with John Williams or somebody. He said, I don't know, there was a lot of tuba stuff, and I think maybe my jaw's locking. I don't know. I'm thinking, don't tell me this. I don't know. Anyway, he played it fine. That was like typical Tommy, right? And then he suggested that I orchestrate it. So that version that you heard, the wind version, I did it that way because I thought it was the way to get it played most often. Stravinsky's Piano Concerto is usually played with orchestra, except that there are no strings in it other than the bass. It's just winds and string bass. So I thought, I'll do the same thing. If I do it that way, any concert can play it, any band can play it. So I can get a orchestra, whatever. Well, it turns out I was mistaken. Bands have played it a lot, but the orchestra, the problem with the piece is it's a light piece. It has triple woodwinds and it's too expensive and no one's going to play it with Mahler, So years later, I did another version. So there's a orchestral version of it. And so there are three versions of the piece. They're all, the tuba part's exactly the same for all three of them. With the piano, which is the original, that's called the sonata. And then the other versions are called the concerto. I never knew whether it was really a big enough piece to be a concerto, but it gets played a lot. I saw a review a couple of years ago that I came across by accident of a concert, of a performance of it in a symphony concert somewhere in the Midwest. I don't know who the player was. I couldn't even tell you what the town was. But the reviewer gave it a rotten review. And he called it a piece of ear candy, And he says, it could have been a better piece, could have been performed or written by so-and-so and so-and-so. And I thought, gee, I guess I should be insulted, but I'm really not, because that was what it was intended to be, a piece that everybody enjoyed. And as far as I know, people enjoy the piece. And it's never bothered me. I still like the piece. It's cute, if I go to a school, like a college or something, and I walk into the band room and there's a tuba player there, if the kid recognizes me, he'll start playing the concerto. If there's a horn player and he recognizes me, he'll start playing the fanfare to Silverado. So I've got these musical, riffs that associate me. But now and then Tommy one time gave me this piece for tuba and cello. I don't know who wrote it, but I didn't like the piece very much. And I said, I think I can do better than that. So I wrote him a piece for himself and his son, Keith, who is a cellist. And that was that bipartition that you recorded, Doug. You recorded great. You played, I'm really thankful you recorded. But that was the other piece that, occasionally people ask for that, but that's not as friendly as the concerto.
Bruce, speaking of the concerto, I've always been curious, the way you spun the melody throughout pretty much all the movements is just genius. I love the fact that it comes back in different ways. It's spun onto itself, and then other things kind of move in melodically that are, especially in the second movement, just using basically a triad to start things off, and how absolutely lovely that is. I mean, being a tuba player, the concerto is one of my favorite 20th century solo works because it's tonal, and that's where I live. I love atonal music. Don't get me wrong, but there comes a point in time, and I think that's one of the reasons I became a jazz musician, is that I just love singable melodies, and I think one of the things I love about the concerto is that it actually is rather singable, and that's that doesn't happen with us a lot.
You know, melodies get a bad rap. Like of the classical concertos, a guy who gets beat up a lot is Tchaikovsky.
Yeah,
Because he wrote really cool melodies. No, they weren't cool melodies. They were great melodies. He
they
wrote
were. Yeah,
really stunningly beautiful melodies. I mean, he was a really good composer. But if you know, a lot of people, if they're going to pick Tchaikovsky or Brahms, they'll pick Brahms because his music is deeper and all that. And he wrote good tunes too, but he wasn't like Tchaikovsky.
no.
So in the movies, since most of my career has been in the movies and in television, I was encouraged. I met a publisher one time. I was working for CBS Television, and then at a publisher, the CBS publisher had come out from New York to hear what we were doing, to see if there was anything that was useful to the publishing company. And I was playing him a lot of background music from the shows we were doing, like Hawaii Five-0 and Gunsmoke and all that stuff. He says, geez, he says, aren't there any tunes here? And I said, well, these are just TV shows. You know, we would just do the background scores. He says, let me tell you something. He said, a couple of years ago, there was this B movie that no one saw in Germany that had a theme in it that became Strangers in the Night. He said, you know, you never know. And right there, I changed my mind. I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. So when I was working on TV shows, after I left CBS, I was doing a lot of television. I did a lot of Quincy and Dallas and Westerns and all that kind of stuff. And whenever I could, I would write a theme. Sometimes I couldn't even use the theme for as long as I had written it, but I always used the theme because I find that people identify with the themes, they identify with the music, and besides that, they're good to listen to. It's like
Right.
It's like doing a speech full of adverbs. I mean, you know, okay, that's pretty clever, and it's not like that like the music isn't any good when you're doing 12 tone or minimalistic or anything else that what is it now? It's I can't think, but you know, whatever the new thing is, there's a lot of really interesting music in the world, but there's not a lot of melodic music in it. And I find with my students that most of them can't write tunes. And
Yeah.
those who can write tunes sort of can't harmonize them and they can't arrange. I mean, it's almost like a forgotten thing. So lately, I've gone back to writing music. I mean, I write whatever I feel like writing if I'm not doing a commercial job. But I'll write a lot of tonal stuff without pandering, but just because I think people don't get it very often and they'd like to hear something that's a solid piece with something like that to listen to, you know.
Yeah, I would like to think that things are changing as far as the way composers are looking at things. And granted, there's always a new way to do things and everything, but man, there's nothing like a 2-5-1. I'm sorry, it works every time. And if the melody supports it, it's even better. And I really think it's something in our DNA that we just like. I always have this conversation with my favorite piano player, Mark, and I go, "What's with the 1-4 thing? Why do we like going to the 4 chords so much? It's just like every hit we just dig it." And some.
I was talking to Randy Newman one time about this, and you know, Randy's a really good musician. He knows a lot of chords. And I said, you know, look, I don't want to appear stupid, but have you noticed how simple music has become? And he looked at me and says, heck, he says, in 1955, we lost all the chords.
Well, hey, can we take a second here? Can we pull up the first movement and just get a taste of the first movement of the concerto? And this particular version is with he's just a wonderful, wonderful tuba player. Is now in the Melbourne Symphony, right, Doug? And Tim, his name's Tim Busby, and it's with orchestra, and he just plays the living snot out of this, man.
No, I met Tim in the last year. I think it was in Chicago or something, and I'd already heard his album. So yeah, he's a very nice guy, also.
Oh yeah, he's a wonderful cat. But this is just this was the best version I could find.
Yeah.
So Quinn, can we roll that, please? So here's a little bit of the first movement of the Concerto for Tuba by Bruce Broughton. So there's a bit of a taste of all three movements, and Bruce, first of all, kudos to you, Tim. Wow, just killing it. Um, Once again, the melodic structure of it, especially the second movement, you know, it's still you. However, you know, there's shades in the back of my brain of the second movement of the Vaughan Williams in there a little bit about being in D and all this other type of thing where it's really bright and it's got this thing. And um, was that just something that, especially with the chromaticisms that are in there, was that just something that just kind of came out, or did you kind of plan on that, or do you mind talking about the process on that?
Well, I wish my process were deep. One thing, look, the one thing I've learned about players, especially brass, but no, I don't know that it's especially brass. I think it's most players, particularly wind players and certainly string players, is they like to play lines. And a guy in the movies who uses the tuba really well is John Williams has used it really well because he often puts it in a place where the tuba sounds great, which is right in the middle of the staff, you know, which is about an octave and a half where amateurs put octave and a half higher, where amateur writers put the tuba because they think the tuba is the bass instrument, so they put them in the bass all the time. Well, they play down there too, but when you hear the tuba up there, I mean, it just sounds beautiful. And Tommy sounded beautiful. I mean, he had a great sound and he had this beautiful ability to play a line. So having spent so much time with him, I had a pretty good idea where everything sounded good. Now I have to say, Tommy learned to play the F tuba because he had that piece. Before that, he played everything on the C tuba.
No way, really.
Yeah, he told me that was the first time he played it in public. Was the
Yeah. It goes down a little low for the F, but I mean, it's playable, you know, but it sounds great up high, particularly in that movement. So I remember I had that tune, and then the harmony, the accompaniment, which was kind of hard to hear here, is all the low instruments playing chromatically, and then all chromatically going down in big open triads, so that it's
Yeah.
kind of funny because the tuba is playing the high part and everybody else is playing the low part, contrabassoons.
Yeah.
As far as the moving around from key to key, I just basically went where the tune took me, and that was basically it. I don't have a huge process when I'm writing. I mean, I try to keep the stuff together, and then after, I mean, particularly as I've gotten older, I will take a look at the piece and I'll erase, I'll rearrange, and I'll add things, or I'll take things out, or I'll move things around. But that piece, as I remember, was not. No, I didn't have a really hard time writing. I don't know. I mean, as soon as I went over and played it with Tommy, it just seemed to sound like a good piece. You know.
Well, I think one of the reasons why I asked the question, Bruce, is that I've talked to other composers about it, and it happens to me every now and then where the music just takes over, and it's just supposed to go that way, and that's the way it is, and you kind of come out of the equation, and it's like you become the conduit, and that's just the way it's supposed to be. And the second movement of the piece is one of my favorite things to play, especially on C, because I love playing C tuba, and it sings. It's what an opportunity to sing, what an opportunity for expressiveness, and your orchestration behind that is brilliant. It just, you know, it's brilliant. I just hate to say it.
I'll tell you that for me, one of the best things was that I was born at the right time to get into television and movies, particularly television, when we were still doing acoustic scores entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing wrong. I mean, I have nothing against synths and all that stuff and how music is generated by a lot of people now. But when I began at CBS, the CBS orchestra was 18 players. That was it. You could have 18 of anything you wanted. Bernard Herrmann was there one time and he had six basses, six contrabassoons, and six bassoons and six bass clarinets. That was his orchestra.
Awesome.
The highest note is middle C, but it never got that high. You could use anything. And so we were doing a lot of series. And when we got a chance to write, we would change the orchestra around. We also had a guy who was running the department, Mort Stevens, who wrote the Hawaii Five-O theme, who was really a terrific dramatic writer and could really get your attention with his ability, So it was really a great lesson. Once I left CBS and once I went freelance, again, I was practicing with these small groups, and I determined that if I were going to work on a series like Quincy or Dallas, particularly because Dallas, every show is basically the same show, I had to change my orchestra. Otherwise, I would start writing the same music. So I would do all these different combinations, and as I did, I would put things together. I mean, sometimes I had a couple of disasters, but even then, you've got to fix them right away. So you figure out how to do this and how to do that, and then you say, okay, I'm never going to do that again. Or you say, what was wrong with that? How come I did that wrong? How come that didn't work out right? And sometimes it's range. Sometimes it's just, you just didn't know the instrument well enough. So I had lots of practice, and I've always been grateful for that. I think also the whole writing on demand thing has been helpful because I've had a lot of requests by musicians to write solo pieces. This one wasn't a request, this one was a gift. But I've had, requests by people to play pieces, and you want something that will suit them, that they would like to play, and again, something that people will want to listen to, rather than just writing something, In the movies, you have to write specifically what you're being asked to write. If it's supposed to be funny, somebody's got to laugh. If it's supposed to be scary, someone's supposed to get chills. And you've got to find the notes that can do that. So I mean, that's a good thing to learn if you like writing
Yes,
music.
it is.
I really like writing music. I like writing all sorts of music. I really don't have a favorite type of music. People say, "What's your style?" I go, "I don't know. My kids know what it is, but I just like to write, and I like to write music that makes some sense." You guys were talking earlier about teaching. I found that I like teaching. I do a little bit of it now. I have 4 or 5 students that I see occasionally. And the thing I've noticed about teaching is that, particularly with composers, sometimes you get, and I've also taught at UCLA and at USC. I've actually taught composition in those places. And so you see all sorts of composers come to you. You see freshmen who don't have a lot of skill, ability, or knowledge, and then you see graduate students who have a lot more of whatever they are going to be eventually. But the one thing you always see is notes that somebody put in order because that was what they thought they wanted to hear. Now, sometimes they're not very effective, but sometimes they are. And sometimes, it seems to me that as a teacher in a case like that, your job is not to make them sound like you or to make them sound like anybody else, but to find out what they are trying to sound like. Try to make those notes really make sense so that somebody can listen to a piece and say, oh yeah, that's really great sense. So you find all these different styles and all these different levels of composition by these young people that come to you. So that when you're writing yourself, or when I'm writing myself, if I have problems, rather than beat my head against the wall and say, I'm just a crappy writer, I think about my students and saying, okay, I don't allow them to say that. I just try to figure out what the problem is and solve the problem. So, as a teacher, you learn more about problem solving for yourself as well as for your students. And I think it improves your whole ability to work.
Doug,
Yeah.
you had something?
Well, I wanted to go. This is my chance. I just wanted to ask you one last thing about the sonata. When I hear that piece, the thing that came on the scene at just the right time. I don't know how many people who are listening remember what it was like in the mid-70s, but for tuba solos, as you said, there wasn't much. And this piece came along and it was just It was the right piece at the right time. And for me, it captures the soul and the sound of Tommy Johnson. I remember hearing him play this. I remember him teaching me this piece. And now when I teach it, I tell my students, well, to me, the sound I have in my ears is Tommy Johnson playing this piece. And I teach them that, you know. And there were some things in this piece that are technically it was pretty groundbreaking at the time, I have to say. The fast tonguing in the third movement. I mean, did you have any? Well, of course, Tommy could play anything, so you were spoiled.
Yeah.
But did you have any reservations about writing some of the stuff that it was going to be too hard for people at the
I've
time?
heard him play it. No, actually, I've always that's even though I was, as I say, a mediocre horn player, I've never been good at gauging how difficult a piece is. I've been working on. I mean, I know the fingers, like on the trill in the second movement. I think it's a low A or something like that. I had to figure out what the fingering was for that, just to make sure that it's really playable. I always look up. I don't play woodwind, so I look up in fingering charts if I have trills or awkward runs. I'll actually look up the fingerings to make sure that they're doable. But no, and he played it really fast. I mean, he played the last movement really, 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 really fast. Just leaping over notes, And so when the two of us got together and we played it for people, it would be pretty exciting by the time you got to the end. It was like, well, it's like that. But I was just, Tommy's a funny guy. I don't know many people who still get talked about so much as Tommy. I mean, I run into guys who knew him, who worked with him, and we end up for a few minutes talking about Tommy, and somebody will tell a joke about something he did or something that he thought was silly and was funny and all that kind of stuff. He was just a fabulous guy. It went into his playing. He had an enormous amount of students who did really, really, really well. In Chicago, there's Gene Picorni, who I've run into several times. He just adores the memory of Tommy and made me tell an audience. A couple of years ago, the Chicago Symphony did a live performance of Silverado, the whole score. And so before the performance, I was supposed to talk to an audience or something like that. And Gene grabbed me and says, make sure you tell them about Tommy. Make sure you tell them about Tommy. And the thing that I had forgotten about Tommy, and this is one of the things that made him so spectacular, aside from just being the world's nicest guy, he had Bell's palsy. Half of his fell, That was right around the time of Silverado. Well, Silverado opens with a tuba solo, really down low. It's the first thing you actually hear. He played that whole friggin' score on the side of his mouth. He learned how to play because it wasn't anything that was going to stop him from playing. So on the strong part of his mouth, he just did that. He just moved his embouchure over that way until he could heal, which took a long time to do. He was an incredible player, just incredible. He told me one time, he said, whenever anybody asks me if I can play something, I always say yes. He says, because 95% of the time I know how to do it, and the other 5% of the time I can learn it.
That's
so
right.
I've been asked that, I think you want to talk about the Seth MacFarlane thing. The first time Seth called me, I wanted to say no, because I thought, I've never done anything like that before. And then I thought of Tommy, and I thought, okay, yeah, sure, okay, I'll do it. 5%, I'll figure out how to do it, And it was like the smartest thing. It was some of the smartest advice I ever got. Because at that level, you do know how to do things, and you're always going to find things that you've never done before. He was just the most positive guy. He said to me one time, people have a lot of anxieties and they have a lot of worries. I sort of have the feeling that usually it just turns out okay. And for the most part, I'd say in his life it did. He just, for the most part, it turns out okay. Yeah. And I think that's a better way, particularly with what we've been going through in the last year. It's a better way to be,
I think you're right on that, Bruce. Hey, Doug, can we move on to the one that you recorded, please? And can you tell, first of all, can you give us a little background on the piece first, and then Bruce can chime in? But which one would you like to have Quinn pull up first?
Maybe. Well, here's the thing, Bruce. I thought we'd play just a tiny little snippet of the Bipartition. It's a piece that people don't know that well. For a long time, it was unavailable. I know your publishing company finally published it. I learned it from the manuscript. In fact, this tattered old copy
Yeah.
was made on Tommy Johnson's copy machine in his
There you
house.
go.
And
Thank you, Tommy. That was Tommy's downside.
I know no composer wants to hear that their music is being distributed for free. But this piece is such a departure from your other style, from the style of the sonata. And I mean, those of you who have made a study of your film music, I mean, to be honest, the first score I heard that was yours was Time Bandits. That's yours, right?
No,
Ah,
no, not Time Bandits. That's okay. You're not the only person. Um,
I'm
Time
thinking,
Bandits, I think Time Bandits is Michael Kamen, I think.
oh, really? I thought I
I,
saw, well, I thought I saw your name on something. Well, okay, my mistake. But I,
What was your first big score, Bruce?
yeah.
Silverado was the first well-known one. Um, I did a lot of television before that that was pretty well-known, but the first well-known movie, the first one that made me a movie composer was Silverado. I had done two movies before that.
And
One,
which were?
the first movie I did at all was for Billy Graham, the evangelist. The second
Uh,
one was a thing called The Ice Pirates, which is
uh,
over there, which is
I've
not.
seen the Ice Pirates, man. Good job.
The
And
one
then I think I used three tubas on The Ice
Yeah,
Pirates.
you did.
And then on an episode of Buck Rogers, I used four tubas. So, I was experimenting a lot. Um, and then I did Silverado. And even on Silverado, I used, there was one session where we had, I think, two tubas and a euphonium, a big brass section. So I can be a
So,
low brass guy.
oh yeah, yeah. So Doug, which one?
maybe just
You got that?
a little bit of the first movement.
Okay, first movement, Quinn. First of all, Doug, holy crap!
Yeah,
Wow.
you sound great.
Just sticking it, man. But I think what I really like about this piece is and how you treated it, Bruce, was brilliant. You're basically dealing with a bass tenor voice and a baritone, because the cello's kind of like got that tenor, maybe baritone voice thing going, not quite bass, and yet they're both soloists and they're both accompanists at the same time, and it's just beautiful writing, in my opinion, and using those voices to their best ability and the range that they've got. Because I think a lot of people, like you said before, the tuba has quite a large range, and depending upon the individual, that range can be quite extreme, and quite beautiful in both tessitura and in the lower octaves. And the same is true with the cello. I mean, it's my brother's a cello player, and it's it's actually a wonderful combination.
Well, I mean, I was fortunate that Tommy had a son, Keith, who played cello. I mean, Keith did a great job on it. Um, it's a odd combination because obviously the tuba takes over. So I asked for the cello to be amplified. Um, but they go pretty well together. But I haven't heard that for a while. It's really nice to hear that recording. It's a really good
It's
recording.
it's a wonderful piece of music, Doug.
Well, it was such a challenge to learn. I mean, look, every minute you put into this piece is worthy. Um, it was unmetered. The version I played, it has since been metered and rebarred.
First movement is unmetered too.
Yeah. Um, and the hardest part is finding a cellist who will agree to play it with you because it's a real commitment. And it took it took a lot of rehearsal. I played this with it was Rachel, and she was a student at Cal Arts, and I think we rehearsed probably every day for a month. Because it was, for me, it was the challenge of getting the tuba sound into the cello sound and playing small enough that we could actually resonate together and that I wasn't dominating her sound. And once we started getting that happening, the piece really, really took off. But we performed the piece several times before we recorded it together. I mean, we spent a lot of time with this piece. And I wish it were played more, but I think
I agree.
it's if you can find a cellist who will do it. Um,
It's one of the problems on the piece because it was unmetered and because it's for two people is page turns. And the version you have is my hand, but I had somebody copy it, and it's a pretty good copy, but it's just you put it out really really wide, and
I
you
would,
like this.
and I put it on a giant card, and then I would just move. Now,
Yeah, it's a
now
full,
with Bluetooth foot pedals, I think it could be done. Just,
that's true.
Do you mind if we listen to the second movement then?
well, the second movement, I, you're the composer, but it's the theme and variations, and I thought we'd play just one or two of the variations to get a flavor of.
Cool. Let it roll, Quinn. Dude, that's just cool. That's just cool, man.
Well, that's a tune. That has sort of a tune in
No,
it.
it is. It's totally a tune. It's totally a tune. And actually, I could see that being used in a whole bunch of different fashion. I mean, one of my favorite things in film scores is the small group film score, and I long to hear those because they're so far and few between. Um, I mean, I'm a huge fan of orchestral things, but when you're able to get like a septet in there and just do the whole film with a septet or a sextet.
Yeah.
Terrence Blanchard's done that. One of my favorite ones is Mark Isham did on Romeo is Bleeding. I think it was a septet where it was just a kind of a freeform jazz score and the colors that are there. But this reminds me of two guys just blowing and there's structure there, and that's what makes it cool, I think.
It's funny, when I was a kid, like a kid being 16, 17, I love the orchestral music of people like Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky and the Russian guys because it was so big and so thick. And as I got older, and maybe it was because of all the TV work I did, because we often use smaller groups, I really gotten to like smaller groups because they're much more specific. Like I like working with a chamber orchestra or just a small group of 5, 6, 10, something like that,
Hmm.
because you can hear everybody. And as I tell my students, if you have a small group like a quintet or an octet, you're going to hear everybody. You don't have the balance problems, but you have the opportunity for the players to really come forward, all of them, which is really, really great. By the way, thinking of that, I wanted to ask you, you just deal with low brass, but you deal with conical brass. Do you know the high bridge brass? Do you know that group?
Yes.
It's a quintet of 2 cornets, alto horn, euphonium, and tuba. And I did a thing for them a couple of months ago. It's a really interesting combination because it's got that sound from high to
Right,
low.
right. Everything's round,
Everything's round. Yeah.
round. Yeah.
There's no trumpets. Yeah.
That's
It's fun.
Thank you. Well, so question, I know you've written some tuba quartet stuff for Jim at USC, and I think you've written 1 or 2 other tuba pieces. Um, our question for all of our guests is, what are you doing now? You
For
know,
tubas.
Well, the whole one of the things that we've both been talking about quite a bit on the podcast is what people are doing to stay busy during COVID, since so many of us are unable to perform or are unable to work. And from what we were talking before we started the show, you're teaching a little bit on Zoom right now. Also, I also wanted to say to you that what an amazing thing for you to take your body of work and archive it where it will be taken care of forever. That's huge, Bruce. I mean, congratulations, and I can't think of a better place to send it than North Texas.
Yeah, North Texas is great. I've been doing a residency there for 2 or 3 years. It's a terrific music school. It's got a killer jazz program. I
Yes.
think there are a lot of people who came from that. I keep running into people who went to North Texas, but I know the dean pretty well, and he asked me one day, he said, would you consider giving your music to us? And I said, yeah, because well, because I know what the music school is. I know what the people are. They have a really good faculty. It's good in 2 ways. One is in terms of their competency, which you would expect of the university. They're all very competent. But the thing that was a selling point for me on that school was the first time I went there, just to kind of say, hi, how are you? And we're thinking about doing this. I met a lot of the people in the composition department and the related departments. And I also met a guy who was in charge of their media arts department, which had nothing at all to do with music. And I didn't know it, but he didn't know anybody around the table. And so I didn't know him, he didn't know me, and all this stuff. So they're talking about this program they wanted to start using media arts and music. And I had never seen a faculty so geared up on what they could do for the students. I have been in more meetings since that time where the only real subject that they're talking about is how can we give this to the students and how can they benefit? I mean, I know it sounds very Pollyannish and all that stuff, but that's what they really do. They're always concerned about how they can make the programs better. They're very inclusive, a lot of different styles. They're very supportive. I mean, it's a wonderful place. So I thought, yeah, I'd like to have my music go there because I know that they will take good care of it. What I've been doing lately is I'm always writing. I've in the last several months, I guess since COVID, I've written 2 or 3 band pieces for a publisher, which is in flex scoring. Do you know what that is? Where you write a piece that's basically in 4, 5, or 6 parts, can be played by a sextet, or it can be played by an entire band, by an entire.
So
the Percy Granger method. Yeah.
Pardon me?
Percy Granger version.
Oh yeah, Percy Granger. Yeah, you 3 or 4 arrangements of the same piece. But it's actually a great thing, particularly now where everybody's doing virtual lessons and virtual band rehearsals and things like this. So a lot of composers have started doing this flex scoring, and I find it really fun. But the last piece I did, in fact, I finished it yesterday and sent it off this morning, is a piece for trumpet solo and piano, but it's made for a trumpet player at the third level, the third grade level. It's not like grade 5 or grade 6, not a virtuoso. It would be probably like a junior high student or maybe a high school student who, you get a certain range that you can play. You have a certain technique that you can play. It's fairly simple, but it's good enough that you can get some music out of it. How many?
That's awesome.
So I wrote a series of, it was like a suite of 5 pieces. In fact, I called it suspect folk tunes, because what they are 5 pieces that could be folk tunes, but of course come from me. And I wrote these pieces all around. So anyway, I'm hoping that something like that would do well. I've done a few of those, and I like doing that. I like writing pieces that I think are going to get used. So we'll see.
That's just wonderful, Bruce. I mean, God, I wish you'd been around when I was a kid looking for tuba stuff to play. Yeah. Hey, speaking of North Texas and the jazz thing, we were talking before, and your relationship with Seth MacFarlane through Orville and probably other things, but you finished a project where you were saying it's the first time that you actually arranged tunes for a studio orchestra for Seth.
Mm.
And you were saying that it was a little bit more difficult than orchestrating. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for me?
Well, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Seth was the guy who called and asked me to do this thing, and I said, well, I've never done that before, but it wasn't this. It was something before this. 3 or 4 years ago, he called me. I knew who he was, but I'd never met him, and we'd never talked. He called me out of the blue, introduced himself on the phone, said that he was a fan, which was nice of him to say, but in fact, he knows a lot about film music, and he has a lot of friends who are composers. And he knows a lot about scores and things, and he's a big fan of music. His shows generally feature a lot of players for the background, even shows like Family Guy. Anyway, he called me and asked me if I would consider writing an arrangement of Luck Be a Lady for him to sing during the summer at the Hollywood Bowl. John Williams had the LA Philharmonic. So I thought to myself, God, I've never done anything like that. I've never done an arrangement like that. And I'm thinking, well, okay, let's see. John Williams doesn't scare me because I've met John, I know John. The Philharmonic doesn't scare me because I know how to work with an orchestra. Hollywood Bowl, I've done things with the Hollywood Bowl. It's the arranging that scares me. So I went through the Tommy Johnson thing. I mean, I really did. Sure, yeah, I'll do it. And I went, Actually, it turned out really well. And so then he called again a couple of months later. I think I can't remember whether he called about the Orville or whether he called about the album, but I think he called about the album. And he said that every year he likes to put out an album, and he was now going to do 3 albums, one for each year, in the next couple of years, and wanted me to arrange one of them. And I went back to that hibernation thing, like, oh God, a whole album, my God, So I said, yeah, okay. And that was, I remember telling Pat Williams I had this thing, and he said, oh, you'll do okay. The guy who really knew what he was doing,
Awesome.
Songs, we had like a dozen or so songs, and I remember he came over to the house and found his ranges, and I was such a beginner, it's funny, and we're singing through the songs, and then he handed me a whole bunch of CDs, a whole bunch of Sinatra CDs, and he said, here, you may want to listen to these. And that was it. So I listened like crazy. So we did this thing, and it's with, it's like a lot of the Sinatra stuff, like big band with orchestra, it worked out great. I mean, I'm very happy with the album. He sings great. I mean, he sounds great on this thing. And then he comes about the Orville.
He channels Sinatra really, really well. I mean, yeah, he does.
He's a good musician. He's a very nice guy. He's a very smart guy. He certainly doesn't waste your time. You don't want to waste his, but he was really good on this. He was really prepared, Yeah, I think it's a really good album with him on it. So
Well,
I was very happy to do it.
well, if you don't mind, I'd like to have Quinn play. I think it's "You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To." Is that the tune that we were listening to? The string writing on this is just absolutely wonderful. It reminds me of, yeah, probably Gordon Jenkins, if that would have been the case, or yeah, probably Gordon Jenkins on this one. But let's listen to this with Seth MacFarlane and Bruce Broughton arrangement.
You'd be so nice to come home to. You'd be so nice by the fire while the breeze on high sang a lullaby. You'd be all that I could desire under stars chilled by the winter, under an August moon burning above. You'd be so nice. You'd be paradise to come home to and love.
So Bruce, who was playing soprano on that?
Dan, um,
Dan Higgins?
yeah, I just became an old man. I can't remember. Yeah, Dan Higgins. Dan Higgins, Chuck Berghofer on bass, Peter Erskine on drums,
Uh-huh.
I
Larry Coons on
no, I just
guitar, and
all of us
um,
tuba players want to thank
on
you
piano was.
for writing this great piece. It's risen to the top.
I'm sorry, I'm just playing. I'm
Um,
embarrassed now. I'm blanking out.
Everybody knows
A
your
wonderful
piece.
player. He also
It's
plays
the
clarinet.
Broughton. I'm playing the Broughton.
Um,
Tom
That's
Rainier?
that's the
Rainier,
benchmark
yeah.
for
I
every
mean,
college
You,
student.
you couldn't get
Your piece
anybody for the
is
session,
used.
could you,
I played it
Bruce?
in
well, you know,
competitions, and it will be.
the guys who
It
generally
won't be
play
your
with
legacy,
Seth.
but it'll be a part of it. So
I think he's been doing some virtual things lately, but that's his band, and he very often will take them everywhere. You know, because those are the guys he relies on. I mean, they're spectacular guys.
Well,
They're
absolutely. They're the best around. I mean, that's one thing about living in LA. If you're looking for great jazz musicians, it's just, get a phone book out and you just can go down like this, because that's where we're all here. Is one of the last places to play besides New York.
you hear Dan, and you go, "Geez,"
I know.
and like I play piano, but I don't play like Tom. I've heard Tom play tons of different styles, and it's just always the right notes in the right place, the right style, the right feel. I mean, all the guys are like that. They're really spectacular.
So after working at Disney for so long, I have a Tom Rainier story for you that'll just crack you up. they used to do this show called Kids in the Kingdom, and this was like late '70s, early '80s type of thing, and it was a set band, and they would do
Well,
the show like
it's
four or
just
five
delightful
times a
to know
day.
that you are still
And Rainier was
working.
playing piano
I was
on
going to
it,
ask
and
you,
instead of
I
having the
mean,
book
how did
up,
you,
he would have whatever
you were
book he was
busier
reading
than I can
at
even
the time
imagine, and
on
then
the
yet somehow you
piano,
find time to write these
play
tune
it,
pieces.
read the book, and instead of
But
turning
I
the
see
music, he'd
that you
turn
are
the
one of
page
these
on the
people, you're
book,
always writing.
keep playing the show, and Tom is just a machine. He's absolutely an amazing musician, an amazing pianist, but just a machine. It's
Yeah,
just
well,
amazing.
I mean, I know what you mean, but it's unfair to call him a machine because he certainly doesn't play like one. I mean, he can do anything.
Yeah, that exactly.
I mean, I'm a pianist, but I only took classical lessons. I was a good reader in the days when I used to play, but I mean, I could read. You know, I played pretty well, but I never played jazz. I could play a lead sheet, sort of, but you wouldn't want to hear me for too long, you know. And to do the kinds of stuff that I've heard Tom and, you know, some of the other guys play, I stand in awe of it because they're, you know, another guy years ago, it was Claire Fisher, because Claire would,
Claire, absolutely.
another guy, he would, if he were working on a show of mine and I gave him a source piece to do, I'd give him the lead sheet. And the first question he would always ask is, do I have to use these chords? And I would say, no, please don't. You know? And then he would just go off and do something. I mean, these guys are just, they're really incredible. It's, you know, for the kind of background that I had, which was musically, it was really classical. I've been really very fortunate to be around a lot of people who were not only very famous, but also really good. Like, and also to get to know them, like, you know, Pat Williams. I knew Mancini a little bit. Morty Stevens, again, was a guy who I learned a lot from. And when I worked at CBS, we used to hire these guys. They'd come in so I could see their scores, like Jerry Goldsmith and John and Michel Legrand. I mean, there's another guy who just...
Oh, God, yes.
So,
absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Bruce. I actually checked out a bunch of the Seth stuff, and your jazz writing is beautiful, man. So I consider you to be a jazz orchestrator as far as I'm concerned.
well, thank you. That's a big compliment, really.
No, believe me, it's just wonderful. And you know what? I hate to say this, Doug, but hey, hang on a second. Quick, can we have a Silverado for the end, please? We're running out of time here.
That's okay.
Yeah, and I'm having an absolute gas. Doug, do you have any closing questions for Bruce? Yes.
Thank you.
Well, it's a good one. I, I'm happy to have a piece like, I mean, in fact, I'm really happy to have a piece like that that gets used so much that people enjoy listening to. So, you know, I'm happy to hear that. Thank you. This has been sort of embarrassing. This is more flattery than I am used to getting, but thank you very much. I appreciate it all. Well, because like, you know, like Doug, you and I work together a lot. I mean, you know, you're a spectacular player and your recordings, to hear people like you play my pieces on a recording, you go, well, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to go. Play it like that, you know, because you don't know when you write this stuff, after it leaves you, it can be anything, you know, it can be trashed, you know, but no, I've been very fortunate in having some really terrific people to learn from. And like Tommy, the tuba, I owe most of what I know to Tommy. And even about voicing, you know, when you get down in quartets and you're voicing down low, all that stuff, I picked a lot of it from Tommy. No, I've always done that. Years ago, when I was doing television, like 40 years ago, television had a real season that went from basically the beginning of September through the end of April. So those months from May until August, um, there was nothing to do. I mean, because I was just doing episodes. I wasn't doing anything more than that. So I would use the time to read and you know, take a trip or that. But I always was writing. Whenever I had time, I'd always be writing. And I look back on it now, and I'm glad I did, because the movie stuff, particularly television, because on television you're writing all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. You get a big technique, and you learn a lot of different styles because you have to write police shows, and you write westerns, and you write soap operas or whatever. You know, you're doing all this other kind of stuff. And then when you get a chance to write a piece, the thing that you don't get to do in movies is you don't get to do what you want, for one thing. You know, you're always writing under somebody else's administration. And you also don't have to worry about form, because in a movie, you basically go where the movie's going to go. But when you're writing a piece, it's just you. You know, I mean, the piece either works or it sinks, and it's just you. Because a movie music is basically accompaniment. Doing a concert piece, that's a piece, and you've got to stand up, and you've got to be the actor, and you've got to be the director, and you've got to be all these things to make an audience, or you know, in this particular case, performers feel like it's worthwhile taking your piece. And that's taken a long time to, that's something I still work on. I still struggle with that, but it's, you know, when it happens well, it's really great. It's really great to happen. So it's been, I picked a really good career for me. That was for sure.
Well, Bruce, I can't thank you enough for your time today and your words, and how thrilled I am that we actually got to talk. It's just incredibly awesome for me. I hope it was for everybody else out there. And we're going to take us out. Actually, we have something queued up with the maestro himself conducting probably one of my all-time favorite scores from anybody. And want to thank everybody out there for tuning in today for Conical Supremacy. Doug Tornquist, again, my good friend, thank you so much for your time. Mr. Bruce Broughton. And we're going to be back again next week on Sunday, and we'll have a very special guest there as well. Keep tuning in, folks, and it's really lovely. And now here's a little thing with the maestro himself conducting.